So we are Shaun and Kieran Molloy, and we own a small weaving company in Donegal, Molloy and Sons, and we specialise in making Donegal tweed, and it's something that our family have been doing for, I'm the 6th generation now that we know of, on the exact same spot. Like, our house is where my great-great-granddad's house was, and he used to weave in a shed beside his house, and we're still doing essentially the same thing. We're going to play a video first, and then we'll talk a little bit about the history of the company and our family, and then what we do and our processes and what we're about in general. So. It's all made by us beside our house, in the same place that our family's been doing it for 5-6 generations.
He would have started working with his uncle in about 1937, thereabouts. And, you know, he'll always have been involved in the textile business, because like it just goes back for generation after generation after generation. It'll always have been there. He would say to you that in the past you could almost know individual fabric, as in who wove it, just by looking at it. I remember, it must be about 20 years ago or so, there was one of the guys that used to hand weave for us, and he was working out where we are now at home, and I went in to see how he's getting on, and he started chatting. He says, "You know, Shaun, it's so weird. I'm here now and I'm weaving, okay, and you guys are after getting married." And he says, "I was doing the exact same thing in the exact same place when your dad got married." I really like this one. I don't know, there's something about it that really speaks to me, appeals to me. I really like the way the colours are popping out of it. Like, it's very natural. The browns, and then you've got the yellows and golds and oranges. Reminds me an awful lot of the landscape and the scenery.
The tweed, it will develop more of a character as it gets older. A little surface will raise on it, like it'll get a bit more fluffy, and some wrinkles might stay in it and stuff like that, which adds a lot of character, and it fits a bit better to you.
It's been handed down, and you have to make the choice. And some people find it easy to walk away. I don't. I think that it's valuable, and it needs to be protected and brought forward and handed on to a new generation.
So that's a little short film that these guys made for us in November, and it's helped us hugely with publicity, and to use as essentially a business card or a calling card, that when people watch that, it's much easier to approach companies, and they see you as more credible because they can see more about you and learn more about you without having to interact with you before they want to. So that's helped us a lot at the start of the business. And now, Dad, if you want to go through some history stuff for a while.
Hi, good morning. As Kieran said too, our family have been involved in textiles going back as far back as we can find out. Kieran is at least the 6th generation as far as we can figure. We've been doing it in the same place in Donegal. To us, that there is a hugely important part of our story. It's about us being off a place, doing something, and it's traditional, and there's a history there for us. I can talk to my dad. He's still a pretty active 89-year-old, and he'll tell me that his father and his father's brother, James Molloy, those guys crossed the Atlantic a number of times in the early part of the 20th century, going to America, selling Donegal tweed, promoting it. His uncle, James Molloy, would have set up a business in America, Donegal Incorporated. They had their own showrooms in Fifth Avenue, they had their own warehouse in New York, and they were exporting pretty large quantities of Donegal tweed back then. They weren't the largest doing it. You had also companies like the Convoy Wool Mills. They started somewhere in the early 19th century, something like 1803. Those guys were working away, and textiles has always been a hugely important part of life in Donegal. I guess maybe it's part of the reason, or part of the cause being that we're Western Seaboard, the land for the most part is marginal, and the people had to find something to occupy themselves to be able to have an income other than just simply relying on what they could produce off their farms. The land, given the fact that it's not great for growing crops, they have sheep, you've got the wool, let's do something with it. Part of that there as well then develops, when we talk to people, they look at our cloth and they see the Donegal spots. This here is supposed to be characteristic of Donegal tweed. Nobody has given me an adequate explanation of why there's spots in Donegal tweed. I like to think that it's maybe part of them being thrifty, recycling. There's an old garment, it's getting to be a bit worn. What do we do with it? Rip it out and knit something new. Or we cut it up and we chuck it into the next thing that we're doing. Hey presto, you've got bright spots. And that is as good an explanation as I can come up with, and better than some of the other explanations that I've heard. It's all part of what our history is, okay? Our family have been doing it, as we say, for a very long time. My dad would have worked with his uncle, as I said in the film, back from maybe 1937. He worked at various other jobs then. He would have gone to Scotland, he worked in the north, around Belfast and that. And then he came back home and he worked with his dad. His dad had come back from America at that stage and they worked together. If you ask my father when he started his business, he'll tell you 1958. But, you know, I've got copy invoices at home from 1947, 1952, 1954. And the two guys are there, and they're sending cloth to Bates's Mill in Dublin to get it finished. So, like, when does a business start? To me, okay, maybe it's to do with laws and incorporating things and stuff like that there. He was always in the textile business, okay? The same as his father before that, his grandfather, his great-grandfather before that. It may not have been formalised, but it was a business and it was how they made their living. He did take the step then in 1964 of setting up his own company, and it was set up initially as a hand-weaving company. And they went out across the world and sold their produce. On those trips, he would have been asked by a lot of the people to, could he help them source knitwear? And he said to himself, well, I'm here, I'm visiting them, I may as well do it. And he came back home and he started with his sisters, and they started getting people to knit for them. And that went on. It got to the stage where he probably had somewhere in the region of 20 weavers and 2,500 hand knitters spread across Northern Ireland. There was some people knitting for him down in Wexford. There would have been some people knitting for him in Scotland. And that was how his business developed. what happened then was when we went to join the EU in the early 70s, various different government reports were being handed out left, right and centre, and they were basically saying that, well, there's just no way that textiles could compete in the new Europe that we were going to be part of, that the Italians and the Germans had the technology and the handling was dead. And, you know, they had to take cognizance of that, and they thought, well, what do we do here? On the other side of the Atlantic, he had the guys in America that he was doing good business with, and they're saying, you need to move the production from being hand woven to power woven. We need more capacity. There's no way that you can do it on the hand woven end of things. You also had pressure too from people wanted it at a lower cost, okay? And all of those things combined to the extent that they felt that in the business they had no option but to transfer from being a business based on hand woven to a business based on power looms. Decided that they couldn't make the investment in power looms, so went down the route of having cloth commission woven. In other words, we would design the cloth, we'd weave the samples, we'd show them, we'd sell it, get the orders, take it back and then have it woven by weavers who had the capacity to make the investment. It happened to be, it was a government body, Giltarier. So we worked with those guys for a long number of years, and then it got to the point where we were finding that we weren't getting the service that we wanted. We were being put to the end of the line in terms of we have an order, but somebody else has an order and their work is getting done. So rather than having it affecting our deliveries to our customers, we decided that we would start our own weaving production on power looms. And at that stage, sort of coincided with when I had left secondary school and went and did a couple of ANCO courses at the time, and went and worked in the Conway wool mills. And at that time, they were stopping production on their old power shuttle looms, the dog cross looms, and they were starting work on new projectile power looms, salters. So they were getting rid of the looms, we bought some of them, and we started power loom weaving then. And gradually over time, we got to the point where we had maybe 6 of their dog cross looms. And we were working away on those, and again, production capacity came to be an issue, and we decided that, okay, we can take out 2 of the dog cross and replace it with 1 Summit, and it'll make more fabric, and that's what it was about at the time. So we continued on like that then. We gradually replaced the dog cross with Summits, all to the end of getting more production capacity, and we worked away like that. At the same time, the knitwear side of the business was growing exponentially, okay? It went from being hand knits, bolted on then, hand loomed, where the garments would be made in the factory by girls operating machines. We started off with guys, but there was too many other things that they wanted to do during the summer. They had salmon fishing to do, there was turf to be cut, there was hay to be won during the winter then, when the fishing was in Killybegs. They wanted to go and do that. There was much more money to be made at it. So the guys weren't going to be knitters, it was going to be the girls that were knitters. That developed on through the 70s into the early 80s. In the early 80s then they took in computerised knit machines. And again, that was a huge boost for the whole business. And the two things were going along, growing and synced together. Then things started to get tough, okay? Economic climate, downturn and everything else. And we felt it just as much as anybody else. And it got to the stage where maybe a couple of years ago we could see that things were getting very, very tough, and we gradually had to scale back on every aspect. And it got to the stage where it was more or less just a family operation from having over 100 workers in the factory and 2,500 handlers. You're shrinking down all the time, back down to just being a core family business. And it got to the stage then where, say, last year we could see that it's getting to be too tough, and myself and Kieran were having discussions as to, well, what can we do? How can we move forward? And we basically decided that part of the problem was that the tweeds, because the knitwear was growing so much, the tweeds had lost out and weren't getting promoted enough. So we decided that I have a skill that's one that in this country is pretty much uncommon. I also am off a place and can say that what we do is off a place. I think that it hadn't been promoted properly this last while. It was lost sight of, and I felt that, okay, we could do that again. We could put it out there and make a living for ourselves from it. So we formed our own company May of last year, and so far we're pretty pleased with how things have gone. We've been very well received where we've gone, and people appreciate the story, they appreciate the heritage that we have to offer them, they appreciate the fact that we are off a place, our product is off a place, and so far so good. I'll hand you over to Kieran now, he can talk about
So I have always grown up, and there's always been weaving happening around our house, and because the sheds were right beside it, I meant that, like, even from being like sort of 3 or 4, I remember being out in the shed and the looms going and loads of people and lots of stuff happening. And then as I grew up, getting little summer jobs like winding bobbins for whoever was hand weaving and stuff like that. Then I would have done summer jobs, like normal basic factory summer jobs, and then went to NCAD and studied ID in college, and after that did a little bit of industrial design type work, and then the whole industry, I guess, collapsed in Ireland, so I was laid off and then was hanging around home for a while, and we were talking, and we have all this machinery and we may as well start a new company and try and make more money than sitting on the dole doing nothing, and it's skills that we have. And because of the story, I think, that behind it, we felt it was very strong, can fit in with what's there in the market today, that the authenticity and heritage are very important themes for fashion at present, at least, and that we're in a position that we have all this story and we can make a really authentic product in the same place our family's been doing it for so long, that it's quite a good, and sometimes it's an easy sales pitch, sometimes it's not in the slightest. And I guess the problem with that is that we're quite expensive because it's just the two of us, and it's a very small scale in comparison to, like, the vast majority of textile manufacturers. Like 60 would be a very small workforce for a textile company, and then you're talking to, we're in some ways competing with companies that have far more employees than that. Benefits that we have is that we're really tiny and that we're very flexible in what we can produce, and also that we can do very small runs for companies. Like we can do at the very minimum like 6 meter length, which really is enough for somebody to make a bespoke suit, really, as opposed to for a company. But it means bigger companies will look for 400 meter minimums for like their minimum production, which turns into like maybe 200 jackets or something, which is still too much for the vast majority of smaller companies and shops, because they want a vast array of different stuff as opposed to like 1,000 of all the same. So we can fit into that little market, and so far we've been doing okay at that. And it's predominantly because of our story and where we're from that we're selling this product that's all mostly produced within a 20-mile radius. Like, we get our yarn from a factory really close to us, and we can work very closely with them. And then it helps with the story, and the product that we end up selling is very genuine and authentic, and that in turn helps the end retailer with their jackets or whatever, that they can tell a story that it comes from this little mill and it's always been made by these two guys in their shed beside their house. And it then allows the customer to build a relationship with where their garment came from, like where their jacket came from. They can tell their friend, like, came from Donegal from these two guys, here's a video. And that then allows the companies that we sell to maybe charge a little bit more, because there's that added story or added sales pitch for them. Like, for our Japanese customers, some of them, like a couple of weeks ago, came over and did some filming and interviews with us. So what they'll be doing is selling their jackets with a screen beside it with interviews with us and scenery and stuff like that, which helps their sales pitch and gets them lots of publicity. And also, because they'll be talking about us, it helps us dramatically from that point of view, because it introduces us to that market, and it just adds a lot of credibility that we can show then other bigger customers of ours. Well, we're working with these guys and they seem to be happy with us, so why don't you give it a lash? And then for us targeting our customers, it's very much on two levels. We aim at big companies, big corporations that have hundreds of stores, and then at the very opposite end of the scale, we try and sell to individuals who want 2 meters to get a jacket made for themselves. And both of them can end up getting a very similar level of service. Like, for some big companies, you meet them and you show them your samples, and then you'll get maybe 3 emails saying, okay, we want that, we want 200 meters, and we want it delivered then. You send them an invoice, they pay you, and that's sort of it. It's very short and sharp, whereas you could spend a month of sending emails to a guy who wants to buy a meter of cloth, and you've talked to him like 20 times, and he could ring you a load of times just to buy this one bit of cloth for his jacket. And it means that we have strange relationships with some of our customers, and it works very much so on these two different levels. But for the bigger companies, we have to target them very specifically, and we don't go to trade shows because of our tiny scale. We get swamped with companies coming and looking for sample requests, and they'd all be ordering like their 10 meters to get their runway collection made, but they won't necessarily turn it into any sort of bulk. So we find it better that we target very specific companies that we feel appreciate what we're selling, as in the heritage, and that it fits in with their price range. And then, because of things like our video, you can send them an email, and it seems so far that we've been quite lucky getting meetings very easily, even with massive corporations, and they know that it's just sort of the two of us, that they're happy to meet. And like, so far we've been doing okay regarding what we're selling to them. What else? Mostly what we feel is that we're doing differently is that we're targeting very specific people that we feel will understand what we're trying to sell them, and that their whole sales part to their end customers is about the heritage and the authenticity, and that's what we're doing at the minute anyway. And we have no real intention of trying to expand dramatically and compete with the guys who have like 60 employees or that are just on a much larger scale. We're happy that it's like this. Maybe we'll have to take on a couple of employees for like part-time when we're manufacturing, like, because it's very cyclical, like one season. Do you want to add anything in there?
Well, what I'll do is maybe talk a little bit just about what we do. our manufacturing process is really quite straightforward. We buy yarn, thread, woolen for the most part, and we perform all of the processes involved in transferring those strands of thread into a woven cloth. Most of the people in the audience here today are wearing clothing that is either knit or woven. Okay, woven is a huge part of everybody's life. An awful lot of people don't think very much about it. Okay, it's just another thing you decide what you're putting on in the morning, and that's it, and it goes out, and hopefully it keeps you warm or keeps you cool or keeps you dry or whatever it is, and it's given very little thought on one level. But at the same time, on a different level, people invest huge amounts of effort in going out and shopping. They associate what they wore on a particular day with what happened on that day. There's sentimentality involved in it as well. Our fabric, because of where it comes from, allows people to invest in our cloth, an awful lot of those things, and it helps us, okay? So, we buy the yarn, we do all the processes, that's the warping. You're taking the individual cones, you're drawing them all out to form the length of the fabric, okay? And then you're crossing them across with the weft to actually form the grid that makes up the cloth. When that's done, the cloth then has to go and be inspected and mended. When we've that done, we take it then to an outside factory where they wash it for us, and we can give them instructions as to various different kinds of finishes that we want on it. If we want it shrink an awful lot so that it becomes quite heavy and waterproof if it's going into an overcoating. If we want it quite clean surface on it, sometimes we get them to run it through a cropping machine that'll take all of the hairiness off it. Sometimes we want the exact opposite effect, where we want them to brush it up and give it a nice soft finish if it's going to be turned into something like a scarf or a blanket. Okay, so we can talk to them guys, have a dialogue and give them instructions as to what we want, depending on what our customer has asked us for. Okay. Quite often when we visit people, Kieran has explained that process, and we've set up the meetings and sent them the emails and everything, and you'll be going through it, and they'll turn around and they'll still ask, and who makes your cloth, who weaves your cloth? It's us, okay? We're the ones that do it, okay? We go on a sales trip to America maybe for a week. That represents 1% of our company's production capacity for the year. So like, we need to get a good return on that when we go out there. So we are very careful, as Kieran says, to target the people that we go for, and try to make sure that we've done our research on them, okay? That is done through contacts that we have from previous business. It's also done very much through the internet, through magazines, fashion magazines and the like of that there. You're always looking to see, well, who's mentioned as being the guy to talk to. And you just make note of that and you keep it, and you've got that as your working database of people that you tap into, okay? And that there's terribly, terribly important for us. As Kieran said, people find it hard to get their head around that it's just the two of us, because they're used to dealing with large companies where there's specific roles. There's the sales role, there's the design role, there's the manufacturing role, and the accounts. We do all of those things. So even though we've gone and seen them and sat down with them and talked to them and explained everything, they still get a surprise when they dial the number and I answer the phone or Kieran answers the phone. Oh, great.
And sometimes the loom's going in the background. I can't hear anything.
Hold on a minute, I need to switch this off. And like, that's just the way our business is. And I think it allows them to appreciate that, okay, the two guys are actually genuine. They are the ones that are actually making it, okay? It adds to the authenticity. There was a discussion last night about providence. Yeah, that's there as well, and integrity, and that's what we try and give people, okay? And it allows them to invest emotionally in what we do and financially in what we do. Our cloth is sometimes criticised because it's long lasting.
It's about a month ago now, one of the companies we deal with in America sent us a swatch in and asked could we like copy it, and would have been made by Granda about 40 years ago, and like it's something that they would have clipped out of a jacket and didn't know that like they guessed it might have come from Donegal, but they sent it back to us and it was made beside our house 40 years ago, which is kind of
nice.
Hilarious in one way, and you're like, shit, it's nobody's good, like there's no resale to that person. But like it's really, like then you tell them that and they're completely shocked and amazed that it came from like Grandad's company back in the day. So our design process, I guess, is all based on, like, to come up with an idea of what your inspiration is, whether it's based on going through our archives. Oh. Okay. Going through our archives, picking out old patterns or working on what our customers are looking for, based on like the trends and colors, and it's essentially everything we make comes from the yarn. So it all starts with what those colors are and what the pattern is going to end up. So we have to work very closely with our spinners, and them being 20 miles away means that we can develop yarns very specifically in what the spots are and what the contrast and the base color might have like 4 different bits of different colored wool all mixed together, and then there'll be maybe 4 different colors of spots or something like that. And we have to work very closely with them to develop colors that we're inspired by, something very specific, like a little rock pool, say, at the beach that has a rock with this really dark gray, and then there's like some lichens and something like some, I don't know, crottle or something growing on it. And you can take these images and you can make a cloth that's very representative of that specifically. And that's sort of something that we try and do a lot of the time with when we're developing the ranges for like each season, or guys will come to us and ask for something very, very specific, and then you try and accommodate them and work with the spinners to make the yarn that'll match in with what they're looking for. Conclusions, I guess. The most important thing for us is the being of a place and the story and the authenticity behind the product, and that we can sort of stand in front of people and say that we make this Donegal tweed in the same place our family's been doing it for generations and generations, and that this is the authentic, real Donegal, as opposed to you can buy a similar looking product from an Italian company, but we're making it in this little tiny area where it's been made for like hundreds and hundreds of years. One of the things when we were sort of working on this presentation, figuring out what we were going to talk about, looking through the companies that used to exist in Donegal that were weaving Donegal tweed, and that there would have been maybe Convoy Woolen Mills, I think at the most had 400 people. McGee's would have had at least 100 people in their weaving. Granda would have had maybe 30 people working for him in the weaving. There was like Gil Tara had maybe 90 people, 100 people. And then there was McNutt's. There was 3 different McNutt companies in Downing that had like loads of people working for them also. And that was in, say, the 60s. And the Design in Ireland report, the Scandinavian report, quoted, not exactly here, but that Donegal tweeds were described as the most valuable asset of Ireland's textile industry, and sort of now within 25 years of that, in the late 80s, that had almost entirely collapsed down to McGee's use, but on like or us, I guess, on a very small scale. And there's a studio in Donegal doing it almost entirely or completely hand weaving, and Eddie Doherty, a hand weaver, working on his own, and a couple of other very small scale operations. And it's like, it's sort of a pity that that's happened in such a small time period from when that was said to the whole group or country as a whole. But for us, the authenticity and being of place is our most important asset, and we feel that it's something that needs to be protected and held onto, and that it should be sort of valued and treasured as some of our crafts and our history and of our place, I guess. So.